how much have you got to hang out with Kara Mori so far?
You know what? I was actually just on a meeting here with her not too long ago, and she was. I didn't meet her on the interview. I've known her for a while, but she was not on my interview. Is probably a better way to say it. But then she was very involved afterwards and through the process. So yeah, I've met her more than on one occasion being down there. So yeah, she's dynamite.
She's awesome. Well, hot tip: don't get into a push-up competition with her. But two, I like just listening to your opening remarks in your press conference and when you addressed the team. I just was like, man, like knowing her and being such a big fan of what she's done there. I'm like, we need to rebrand Princeton University as Gritty U. Like, let's say that like right now. I'm like, there is such a clear identity for the hockey program and the approach that it sounds like you plan on taking and what she's established, and it sounds awesome.
Yeah, yeah, no, I like that. I like that's a great brand here. I've never been accused of doing anything too graceful, but the grit is certainly part of it.
The other thing that really stood out to me in your press conference is that you framed this opportunity at Princeton as a journey, and you said that to the players that we're going to go on this journey together. Um, what are the first steps in that journey?
The first steps were obviously meeting everybody and getting a chance just to kind of have a one-on-one and because everything happened so quickly, but just to really get an opportunity to chat with each individual guy, from the current players to the guys that are coming in this year, and then from there really finding a way to create connectivity between them, and us as a staff, and then that continues to grow and be put together here. And those are the first stages here, because it's the guys are wrapping up exams this week, so they're still involved in school, and obviously working out and going to the rink and doing things that hockey players do, but they're still wrapping up school. And so that's the first part of the journey, together, to create that connectivity, to be able to kind of start getting on the same page together.
When you have those conversations with the players, like the feedback that they give you, is it focused on changes that potentially happen in terms of how the team plays on the ice? Is it how the team operates off the ice? What have they maybe pointed to as an area of focus that they'd like to see some changes in?
Yeah. Well, I think they speak to that. They're all young kids. Is that they kind of speak their mind, whatever's on their mind, and so it was a little bit of both, and I think that as things kind of progress, is that you got a sense that everybody is looking for kind of a fresh start and kind of a new chapter, and that was probably the thing that resonated the most. There's some great kids that are here, and they want an opportunity to kind of move forward and progress, because it obviously was a tough spring for them with some different changes, and they want to get going and start looking towards the future.
As you look to build your roster for next year, and obviously you'd be inheriting some commitments, but in the world of NIL and the transfer portal, does that have the same effect at a school like Princeton, where obviously, I think I would assume that the decision for most players to come there has just as much to do as the academics as it does the hockey program?
Yeah. I think when I think that what you just alluded to, Aaron, I think that has an effect with every program to a point. It just comes in different ways. Some are a little bit more immediate, but it certainly does have an effect. And how you put it is, the student athlete that is looking to come to Princeton, is there's a focus on what that institution provides as an institution. That's part of they're a driven student. The academics is a large piece of who they are and their fabric. but then being able to, then tie that into the passion and the love for the game that they have, because many of these guys, as have spent an entire lifetime, or their entire lifetime, progressing to get to an opportunity to play at a Division I school, or to play college hockey with the aspirations of going on. And so it's at the end of the day, they're still hockey players, and they have passion, and they have dreams that they look to fulfill.
I thought it was really interesting too in your opening remarks when you were hired. You talked about the personality required to succeed in a hockey program at a school like Princeton, and that it's there's maybe some more. What I read into that is that perhaps there's maybe more dynamics at play than just getting a good hockey player, a kid that's fully committed there. What is that personality? And how is that different? I mean, obviously you're coming from Cornell, but how might it be different from, say, some of the other traditional blue blood programs that we're familiar with?
Yeah, well, I think you want to see somebody that, regardless of what their undertaking is, whether it's the academic component, whether it's a hockey component, or whatever it is that they're doing, is that there's a real drive and a passion to it. Obviously, my experience at Cornell is, another Ivy League institution, is that there's a constant drive that was in our locker room, and that's what we're looking for. And you can see it already in the locker room at Princeton. But to have that drive in terms of what it is that the guys want to accomplish. I call it positive peer pressure in a lot of ways. Like, you got some guys that are
Yeah,
legit 4.0s and rocket scientists, and then you have other
literally.
guys that, yeah, it literally, exactly. And then you have other guys that, well, nobody's a bad student. Everybody's a very good student, but they come in. There's a little bit of a difference, but they're all driven to succeed, and that the same drive, on the ice. And so that's why I call it a positive peer pressure, is that they're always working. It's competing, but it's just that drive. They're around ambitious people that are really focused on what their passion is.
Yeah, it's so funny. So I'm like just getting ready for this conversation, and I'm listening to all your reading all the articles that came out and listening to your interviews, etc. And so while I'm doing that, I've got the 30 for 30 on the 84 Chicago Bears on the background. And I'm literally
Yeah.
like, as I'm listening to you talk about that personality on the TV, they're talking about how that team operated because they were all a little bit nuts. And they're like, that's why it worked. Like, we didn't have like a couple guys that were nuts on the roster. Like, everybody was nuts, and that became the personality, and that's why it worked. And I could see where, in Princeton, as a coach and a leader, that's it would be so easy for some kids to come there if they didn't have that right personality, where they could become energy vampires, and not in a negative way, but just they get bogged down from school, the training, the hockey, and pretty soon I could just sense where, if you don't get that right personality, they could come to the rink and maybe just not have the required amount of enthusiasm uh, to bring the energy they need to do the group.
For sure, and I think you alluded to it, is that, their outlet and their release is to come to the rink and to have fun with it. Obviously, there needs to be a competitive environment, and an environment of development that needs to be able to occur. But the reality of it is, I go back to it, is that these guys have a passion, and hockey has been their passion, and in a lot of cases, in all their cases, a huge part of their lives. And so this is their opportunity to have fun, regardless of what has gone on during the day. Can we give them a couple hours where they can have some flat out fun, and it'll be hard. They'll work, they'll compete, but can they do it with a grin on your face? And so, to use your term, the energy vampire, I think is really important. Is that, you can't have those in the locker room. It's a degree of focus. It's positivity, but it's a degree of focus to be able to improve, and to be able to do it with a little bit of a grin and a smile on your face at the same time.
Love that. Love that. Um, when you were going through the interview process, and I'm sure one of the questions is, "Hey Ben, how what is it going to take for a place like Princeton to be competitive in hockey at the Division One level?" How do you answer that?
I think we started this, in terms of the personality, the person that comes in, and to be able to continue that, because there is that personality that's already, in our locker room currently, but to be able to evolve and continue to have guys that, you know ultimately have a drive and a passion to bring school and hockey, together, and to find that right balance. It's really easy to say, "Hey, I just want a hockey player," or "I just, want somebody that can be able to get into school." But it's finding that balance, and I do find that individuals, as they do their research and as our staff does research, those things um, start to percolate towards the top. Kind of, kids start to separate themselves because they realize that certain areas may be tougher or maybe not exactly what they expected, and it's maybe not for them, so it's not a great fit. Whether that's the academic piece, whether that is, the hockey piece, but if you continue to work and uncover things, is you get to a point where players start to kind of show themselves, and as a staff, you need to be able to recognize, is this a fit where they can really have that balance, to be able to have a drive to, and still have the passion, but the drive to be able to excel in both.
Yeah, totally. And I guess with that, I mean, you've obviously spent a large part of your career out on the road recruiting. Now you're going to be providing some direction to your staff on what to look for. And man, like one of the easiest things to do as a coach is to go into a rink and pick out the best player. Like anybody can do that. It's going in there and finding the player that's maybe that middle of the road, but the player that has that potential that can fit in. And I think that's where there's a real skill set, particularly at your level where you get to build your own roster. What might be the instructions that you give to your staff to say, hey, this is sort of the profile of player we're looking for on the ice. Here's maybe some of the underlying tells that we want to look for. And at the same time, too, I mean, I never really thought about this, but I imagine like when your assistant coaches go on the road recruiting, there's probably a lot of games they could go to, whether it's in the USHL or the junior A loops, where there's not one player on the ice that's even a candidate. And that's probably, I guess, is that probably just as much as the battle is figuring out who to go watch.
100%. I mean, and so, like, it's really unique because you have to have that homework done before you
Yeah.
get on the road. Like, can somebody get in? First of all, have some calls. What it might not be with the individual, but with the coach. With the advisor, with people that give you an idea of, hey, this could be a fit. And so there's a lot of, phone work and prep work before you even get on the road. So you're, like you said, you're not in a rink where there's 40 guys on the ice, and none of them could ever play at Princeton. And so there's a lot of prep work to do in that. But I think, as you talk about, like, different instructions, is that uh, I think the one thing that in my time that I learned at Cornell, and Cornell wasn't for everybody either. It wasn't a fit for everybody, but that there's a wow factor that comes out. Like, what is it that you do well more than anybody else, or what makes you pop, that at the end of the day, a recruiter, a coach can't walk away from you. Like, I could tell you two or three different stories that I didn't know about a guy at a rink. Um, I'll use a guy, Jeff Malott, that's playing for the Manitoba Moose right now. He was playing with Cale Makar and Brooks, and everybody knew who Cale Makar was, and it pretty hard not to be fixated. Even though he was already committed, not to see him. But I remember watching Jeff the first time, and I noticed him, and having a talk with Pap afterwards. He's like, you got to have a real look at him. There's something about him. And then watching him play in Penticton one night, you kind of got fixated on him because he flat out didn't want to lose. And I still tell the story, and he and I joke about it because the first time I ever spoke to him, I was taking the garbage out, and I literally was in the garage, and my wife, I think she thought I had a heart attack because she's like, she comes out, opens the door, and she still sees me on the phone, and I've been talking to her for about a half an hour, 40 minutes, and she's like, "What?" Like kind of looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm on the phone." And as J Mal always says, he goes, "Benny, I don't know if we even talked hockey that night." And I really don't. I don't even know what the conversation was, but I know in 15 to 20 seconds, I'm like, this conversation's different. And that personality has carried over for all of like his successes because nothing has come ever easy to him. But those like that wow personality, that was his skill set that was different and made him a great captain, makes him a great player that he is, and an unbelievable teammate. Currently, and he'll have a professional career as long as he wants because he's an unbelievable teammate.
That's man, that's a great story, and I would think that that's probably one of the aspects of team building that's not respected. I mean, again, anybody can find the right a talented player or identify a talented player, but finding somebody that just fits your personality, and it's not, I don't think, a right or wrong thing, but sometimes some players just, I think, as you said, it not Cornell's not for everybody, Princeton's not for everybody, but just knowing what that looks like for you and who you're just going to jive with is so important. When you talked a lot about being gritty, you talked a lot about being relentless. Like, I don't know if it's happened yet, but there's going to be a point sooner than later where I'm assuming your assistant coaches, you're just going to be watching a lot of tape, and it's probably not full games, but it's probably going to be, and it's maybe not highlight reels, but it's going to be just some short snippets that they're going to say, here's what we think that wow factor might be with this player. What might be some of the isolated aspects of a player's game that you would say, man, I would love to see this in more of our players, or in the majority of the players that we bring on to your program there?
I think when you look at it that way, just the sheer like athleticism within the compete and the relentlessness. Like I think that's something that everybody has control of. Um, we're all given different skill sets. Some can enhance them better than others, but you have the ability when you step on the ice or whatever it is that you're doing, you have an opportunity that you can control to be the hardest working person in the office on the ice, and to be relentless, pursuing your passion, and that's what I want to see as we're looking. And that to me that comes out in different ways. Like it's some guys are going to finish every check.
Yeah.
You know, some guys are going to be because they can skate like the wind. Are they first on the forecheck? Every time. Like, are they the first to puck? Like, we're not leaving this to chance. Like, it's a 50-50, and I win the puck every time because why? I'm just faster than you. Like, and that pops. And so I think when you ask that question, I think it comes a little bit, everybody's slightly different, but it is, what is your wow skill that you do better? And I think that's where I use the term athleticism, because you might be, an unbelievable skater. Your line mate or somebody, the guy on the other team that we're looking at on that given night, has great quick twitch. So he might not move the same way, but he's great in traffic. So he can make plays in traffic. Like, what is that skill that you're like, that can translate to help you at Princeton and make us better. It might look a little different than your line mate, but this is going to affect our group in a positive way.
Yeah. And, I guess with that in mind, like, you talk about being gritty, but like, I'm sure some of that's kind of code is like, hey, we're going to be really stingy defensively. And that was a hallmark of your program in Cornell. I know that you oversaw the defensemen. I believe it's over the last 15 years, like the lowest goals against in the country cumulatively. Also, the highest scoring defense. Man, that's tough to do. Like, that stat just popped at me because normally you pick one side of the fence, right? You're either going to be you're getting up ice trying to score, or you're going to be sitting back and defending. it's probably fair to say that over the course of your time in Cornell, some of the strategic stuff changes as the game evolves. But would there be any underlying, let's call them principles, that you would say, hey, defensively, like, this wasn't so much X's and O's, but we wanted to make sure that our players were doing, these two or three things. And if we did that, we were going to be good defensively. Because it's one of those things. Like, no coach gets in front of their team and says, hey guys, we want to be really shitty defensively tonight. Like, everybody's trying to be good, but it's easier said than done.
100%. And I think because some of those guys, when you talk about that, the defensive attribute, once again, you can control that. So, you have an ability to be hard to play against every night. Well, the answer is yes. You can control that, whether you're going to be hard to play against every night. And that was what our expectation was. And, I think early on when a new defenseman would come, they got, brought into that culture to realize what that actually looked like. And that playing hard against happened the same way Monday and Tuesday as it did Friday and Saturday. And I think usually the freshmen, or first year, I guess we're supposed to call them now, is they would find that a little bit challenging, that how hard those Mondays and Tuesdays were. There was no off switch, but that translated to the Friday and Saturday, and their teammates would expect that from them. Like the forwards would expect every rep to get, played hard against, like, and so that was an expectation that we would never let waver, whether it was a Monday, whether it was a Wednesday or game night. And, I think that became also a consistency too, that I'm sure the guys that I've coached with could probably tell you some stories with the verbiage, how that was used, and have some good chuckles, because it never wavered. They probably, they would look at me because they knew what was coming, but you had to play through your body every time, and create those hard scenarios to play against. But as you allude to, like, the offensive piece of it is, let's call a spade is everybody wants to score and be a factor on the offense. So we got to still work in those areas. And I think we did a nice job of that at Cornell, in our skill sessions, to really focus in on that. We adapted over the years in terms of doing different things. We'd steal different ideas from our guys that had gone on to play pro. They'd be like, hey, Benny, this really works that we did at Cornell, but we'd have to make a little bit of a tweak here or there, in terms of how we would practice it. And I think that evolved, over the time. So we spent a lot of time, working offensive blue lines and different things like that as well too.
I Guy Godowski, when he was at Princeton, and I know a couple guys that played for him there, and had a few players that went on to play there.
Yeah.
And, I don't know what the switch was, but somehow he created a mindset. Like, he erased that perception that it was a second tier hockey school. Like, he created an environment where they say, hey, we can go toe to toe with anybody. And they believed it. But I always remember a guy telling me, and I've retold the story a bunch of times. I think it applies so much to coaching. And it was like, when he got there, he's like, he wanted to do a million things, which I think we all would, right? Like, if we were in your shoes, you got a million ideas that have been baking in your head, waiting for this opportunity. And he talked about how when he got there, he realized, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but effectively he was kind of overwhelming the players. And it happened to be during the lockout, which is in 2004. And just out of the blue, he cold called Ken Hitchcock, who at the time was in Philly, had nothing to do, and said, hey, any chance you'd come out and watch my practices? So Ken starts coming out and says, guys, like, any suggestions? He's like, yeah, here's what we're going to do. I want you to pick 6 habits, and you're going to pick 6 habits, and that's all you're going to talk about until those become habits. And every drill you do, every system, it's not about the system, it's not about the drill. It's just going to come back to one of these habits. And I wish I could remember what all 6 were. Like, I know one of them was opening up the pucks. It was that simple. And that kind of became the foundation where they just got some traction, built some confidence. And, at some point in his tenure, they got into maybe more of the big picture stuff. But I sense there's a real lesson there. When you go into this, like, what is the first month of practice look like? What do you want to instill?
Well, you talk about the habits, the details, is that's what I want to see happen, and we'll have not, it's not going to be over the top, but it will be, certain habits, from stick detail to pace of play, to be able to do that. And can we do that every single practice? And that's going to be what our standard is to in those, first weeks is we need to set that standard so that this is what is expected, every single day, whether it's a Monday at practice, whether it's a Friday at a game, and anywhere in between. And so that's where we need to be able to walk out of that training camp, 6 weeks, is that, hey, we have this, established, that we know that this is what our habits are day in and day out. So that if you're my line mate or you're my D partner, that I'm holding you accountable to those standards the same way that you're holding me to those standards as well too. And I think the biggest thing, more than anything, is that it in the entirety of this is that, having a selfless approach to this,
Yeah.
is that, like, this is we're in this for Princeton hockey together, to be able to, improve on a narrative and change a narrative to that, hey, we're moving in a direction where there is a standard every night of compete and relentlessness that we can hold ourselves to. And but it's not for Ben Syer, it's not for Aaron Wilbur, it's for the group, that this is, hey, we're doing this together as a group.
Yeah, and gosh, man, like you just touched on it too. It's like it's that accountability starts on Monday, right? And I think from an outsider's perspective, it is so underappreciated how hard it is as a coach and as a leader to be firm enough 6 days a week, hold that standard while also making it the rink a destination and fun. Um, Again, easier said than done, but that's a real challenge without burning players out. And you know, I just look at your background. Working for Mike and Cornell and Rand and Quinnipiac. I've never. I've never gone through a practice with either of those gentlemen. My
Yeah.
perception is it's not rainbows and bubblegum. Um, and
Yeah, safe
like,
to say.
what have you taken away from them, and maybe how do you balance that with your team? And I mean, I think you just touched a little bit on it, just with it's the peer pressure that comes from the group and passing on some of that responsibility.
Yeah, I think what at the end of the day, there's two things that both of them share in traits, because there's both very different personalities, but they are probably the two most competitive guys that I've ever been around. Okay, it just oozes itself. And I know in this environment, in any sporting environment, there's a lot of competitive people, but those two individuals, more than anybody, hate to lose. But they also find a way to, I don't want to just say fun, but because that wouldn't be the right term, but there's an enjoyment, because there's a loyalty piece to it. Like, Rand has great loyalty for those that have played for him and worked for him. And Schafer has an unbelievable way of, you know, I'll use the term joking, but I don't know if that's the right term, but it like, in a tense situation or a way that he's very demanding, guys also have a real sense of, hey, this is going to benefit myself, and it's going to benefit my line, and it's going to benefit our group. And so, like you said, it's not all rainbows and bubble gum, but at the same token, it's there's an appreciation for what the outcome is on the other side, and to be able to show the guys that, hey, yes, this is hard work and this isn't easy, but we do appreciate the efforts that you're putting in. Like, we realize this isn't easy, but in order to be able to succeed at the highest level, is that you need to put in this work.
You just touched on loyalty. So normally when we have guests on the show, you go through their elite prospects profile,
Yeah.
and usually the team changes every second or third season.
Yeah.
In your case, there's two teams. There's Quinnipiac, there's Cornell. A lot of loyalty. You know, man, there's a great quote from Mike Keenan's book where he wrote a letter to Dan Snyder when he first got hired in Philadelphia, and he stressed the point. He's like, listen, he goes, I've rounded. He's like, you could go hire a former NHL player that started on third base, or you can hire me, the guy that had to round all the bases and develop his craft. And I mean, I think that just speaks to the work that you've put in. But unlike what a lot of coaches do, where when they don't get an opportunity, they jump. They're kind of jumping around. You've been really loyal. How have you thought about just navigating your career and weighing, hey, do I stay in one place and just be where my feet are, or am I better served by going to be a head coach in the USHL or going to the American Hockey League with the hopes that maybe that opens the door, as a head coach at the Division I level?
I think it comes twofold. Is that I've been really lucky. Like my wife is a career. She's had a successful career and kept me grounded in the regards to, hey, family is first and foremost in everything that we do. And so some of the different decisions that have been made or not made have had a lot to do with family. And the second part of that is when you say where your feet are, is somebody shared this with me a long, long time ago, is you can jump or you can make the situation or the place that you're in better. And, I think I didn't know if this opportunity would ever, present itself or not, and I was okay with that. And certainly extremely excited about the opportunity. But what I never wanted to do was shortchange our players at either program. That I was worried about going somebody or going somewhere else to have a different experience. Like, did I want to get better and bring experiences to our guys to elevate their performance and help aid our staff to be better? 100%. But I wasn't going to do that just at the cost of you know I shouldn't say the cost, but like from jumping from one place to the other. Like I liked where I was, and the people that we just talked about, I liked those people. I liked the assistant coaches that I've worked with. Like, and so that part is family, and that people have always mattered. And so that's where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make my place of employment, my home away from my home, a better place. And so that's been largely my focus, and like you said, probably led me not to move around as much.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. Um, so when you're at Quinnipiac, you're taking a team from effectively dust and creating a foundation where they eventually win a national championship after knocking on the door several times. And maybe that's where we start. Like, where did you watch that game from? When Quinnipiac,
Yeah,
that had to
it
feel
was
good,
funny.
man.
Oh, it was great. Um, I was actually in Florida on a vacation with my family, and I almost went to the game, but I was a few hours away, and I hadn't, it was the end of the year, and so I certainly wanted to spend time with my family. I had one daughter, I think, that would have jumped in the car and gone with me, but the other one still wanted to spend some time at Disney World. And so anyhow, I'm watching it, and I couldn't have been happier for him, because when I started working for Rand, and that's probably where you and I first met about 1,000 years ago, working Lakeland camps together. Um,
Yeah.
he had a focus of winning, but competing in the national tournament, and at that time, I think to most we were a long ways away, and the most were right, but like he had a perspective that wasn't shared every day, but it was brought up at different times, and for able to see his journey and to see his staff that's still very familiar with, even though I'm not as familiar with the players now as I once was. It was great to see his work, and like even Joe Dume, who had played there, was a huge part of changing cultures and advancing things. Now as a coach there, being able to be rewarded with that national championship, it was certainly it was exciting to see, and I think kind of a proud moment too from an onlooker, but somebody that had at one point he was a huge part of his life, and certainly certainly a large part of my journey and my story.
Oh man, well I'll tell you what. You mentioned Lakeland Super Camps. Don't worry, that's highlighted in yellow on my notes here. But I remember, like I watch a lot of sports. I don't know if I've ever gotten goosebumps watching Quinnipiac win, and I had no skin in the game outside of just knowing you guys when you were getting that thing off the ground and just feeling like, man, just the amount of pride and so many people, like the blood, sweat, and tears that so many people had invested, as you said, 1,000 years ago, just to make that possible. It was so cool, and I do want to go back to your origins, but before I do, like that experience of starting a program from dust and then going to Cornell, Ivy League school, similar environment, I would assume, as to what you're going to be dealing with at Princeton. Which of those two experiences maybe lends itself more to, at least the early stages of building the program at Princeton?
Well, I think it's a very good question, because I was asked something similar in my interview, and I honestly don't know that necessarily one is better than the other, because I think there's a couple different things that come into play. Is one, if you go to Quinnipiac, is that the importance of recruiting the right player that we've already touched on, and to really um, you know brand or build a program there. And there's branding already at Princeton. I'm aware of that, but it like to continue to enhance that, how everything is so important in that regard. And but then you go to Cornell, and there's different hurdles that you face there that you don't face at a scholarship school. And
Yeah.
I thought I knew most of those hurdles, and I realized in a week I didn't know half the hurdles that we were about to face at Cornell. And to be able to overcome those, but to be able to maintain a culture that Coach Schafer has built over a number of years, and being fortunate to be part of that, and you know continuing that culture, I think is really important, because you've even touched on this a little bit. Is that to be able to have a culture day in and day out, where the guys want to compete, want to come to the rink and have fun, but to work, is something that is 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 so important. Especially with the demands and so forth that they face on a daily basis at school. So I'm not answering your question. I'm probably taking the safe way out here, but the reality of it is that's truly how I feel. Is that
Yeah.
there's benefits to both, and certainly traits that come from both experiences that I know that I'll use.
Well, you know what? I kind of put myself in the Princeton AD's shoes, and I'm like, man, if before making this hire, if I was to sort of put on a whiteboard the experiences that would be most valuable, it's probably those. Like, it's literally your resume of just building something from scratch. You talk about the branding, and I think that's so underrated in coaching. Like, you got to brand your program. Like, people need to aspire to be there, and then obviously having the experience at Cornell and dealing with just probably the back end administrative stuff, and just how that works to get players on campus and set up for success. Um, so Lakeland Super Camps. I don't know about you. I feel like if Netflix did a series called Lakeland Super Camps and just outlined that whole way of recruiting, player acquisition, like it would be the most entertaining series of all time.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And you think of all the guys that we worked with or had different interactions with, and some of them longer interactions than others. But there's a lot of guys that like lengthy friendships. Like it was interactions that turned into friendships. Now part of it might be some of the hotels and motels that we stayed in that I
The
still remember
minivan
staying in
rides,
one.
Doctor Evil behind the wheel, like, oh yeah,
Well, yeah, 100%. I still remember one we stayed at in Edmonton that um, yeah, that was a little frightening, but
yeah. I roomed with Scott Robson, I think that trip. So yeah, that's a whole
yeah,
nother.
yep, exactly. And it's amazing how those, like I said, those interactions turned into friendships um, eh, yeah, because I've spent a lot of time out west over my years recruiting, and my wife would always be like, "Well, you're going to BC, you know so many people," and literally, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time, in BC growing up, and now I've spent way more time out there, and
Yeah.
met some of my best friends, and guys that I talk to on a regular basis that are 2,000 plus miles away.
Well, so again, I think to me this is the most fascinating part, and and I feel so privileged to get to have these conversations on a weekly basis. Is I mean, I didn't know this until last night. Like originally, you got a degree in urban planning,
Yeah,
um, and you grow up in Canada. You go to um, Ohio University or the University of Ohio.
yeah,
Pardon me, the Bobcat,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so I just know, like, at the time, like when I knew you, Scott Robson and Kyle Wallach, I thought I was like hanging out with a rock band. Like, and I say that a compliment. I just thought like you guys had like you could just see the chemistry, and it just seemed like the coolest opportunity. But then you fast forward and you realize that we're all making no money. We're all like counting our per diem dollars to make sure
yeah.
that we can get 3 square meals in us. And but I look at you and I'm like, obviously you could have at some point you could have decided, I'm going to use my degree and go another way career wise. What was the pull to lean into coaching?
I think the biggest thing is, well, twofold. Is one, I grew up with parents that were teachers. And so I think that was innately in me. My dad coached a little bit, and but not a crazy amount. But it was just a teacher mentality, and I had uncles that were involved in teaching, and that's, I think, what I was around growing up. And then I went to had a chance to do my master's in down at Ohio University, and fell in love with the entire program. And it was a club program at the time. And the coach that was there, Craig McCarthy, he's now a professor there. Once again, was, I mean, he could be coaching somewhere else if he chose a different path, but he was doing his PhD. Was just an absolutely tremendous teacher, and he just, you know, I kind of, he fell in love with it, and like the teaching part of it, and so forth. And obviously, moving on to Quinnipiac and so forth. But I don't know. You're right. I could have left at some point, but it kind of somehow innately stuck with me, and I enjoyed it. Uh, and like I said earlier, I worked with some great people along the way, and I've always been about being around great people, and feel very fortunate in that regard. And it kind of stuck with me. I don't know how else to really put it.
Well, you know what? I pay attention to the coaching industry like pretty closely. Goes without saying.
Yeah,
You talk about the great people, and I mean this sincerely. In the time that I've been doing this, I have never seen a coach get hired and experience the outpouring of support from their peers in the coaching community as you did when you got hired in Princeton. Like, and it was unbelievable. Like the amount of coaches, people that you've either worked with, that you've competed with, but it seemed universally that just so many people were so pumped for you genuinely and went out of their way to let people know, that they were in your corner. And again, it was remarkable. And I know, like, it's probably something you don't want to touch on, but I think it's worth noting. And one of those people, I reached out to Rand ahead of this, and I just said, like, you know, what should I ask Ben? And he said, he goes, I got a lot of things that, probably don't need to dive into, but the
Yeah.
one thing he said was this. He goes, like, when I hired Ben, it was at a club hockey. This is Rand speaking. He's like, I just got married, and he's like, I had to invite him to come live with me and my new wife. As we started, and he's like, he was a part of our family effectively for the first 3 or 4 months. And I heard that, and I was like, man, that probably says a lot. Like, when you go through something like that with the person, like, when you talk about loyalty and just wanting to, really lean in and see it through, and maybe ignore their career in urban planning, as sexy as that sounds,
Yeah.
and make it work. So, what advice did Rand give you when you got this opportunity?
Well, he was great. He goes, you got to prioritize. He goes, you'll be getting, pulled in a lot of different directions, but you got to prioritize what is immediately important to your program. And it was great advice, and I've heard that from some other people. But obviously, him being a mentor of mine, to be able to hear it, meant a lot. And I will say this: I don't mean to diverge on the question. I did not stay 3 or 4 months. I was there longer than probably I was welcome. But Nikki was great as wife. But I was my wife now, who was my girlfriend at the time, was like, "You need to get out of there real quick." Like, it was, yeah. She's like, "We got to find you a place real quick." So, but I was there probably longer than I should have been, for sure. And I'm very. You don't hear that stuff, anymore. But he's 100% right. It was. I moved into his place there, and it was crazy.
Well, hey, listen. Anybody that's a real coach has done their share of couch surfing, so
Yeah.
that's the rite of passage to go through. I reached out to Kyle Wallach as well. Man, he had some strong opinions on your wardrobe back in the day when you were
Oh,
a
yeah.
coach. He had mentioned some sunglasses, a mustard yellow sports coat, but he also mentioned, like, a time when you forgot jerseys for a home
Oh,
game. I
geez.
think the rink was, like, off campus, and like, I heard that, and I'm like, man, like, I can. I don't know if I got enough fingers and toes to think about enough boo boos like that, especially when you're in your role where you're driving the Zamboni, selling the hot dogs, like, you're doing
Yeah.
your staff's doing everything. Is you begin this process, how do you think about dealing with boo boos or correcting mistakes, whether it's players on the ice, your staff, and easing people into doing things the way that you want it to be done?
Yeah. Well, I think there has to be, those, by the way, are some funny stories. Those are probably for a different discussion. But the jerseys was a highlight, and I have a new appreciation for equipment managers
I bet
after
you
that
do. You need to
experience.
go through that to show them the love they deserve. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I think there has to be, clear expectations, that are delivered to staff, to players. Like you said, there certainly will be some times that there's some learning curves, as there is in any program, and with any staff. Is that I think that you have to be able to be as prepared as, the utmost that you can be prepared for all scenarios and all situations. And then, you have to manage accordingly. Like, there will be mistakes that are made, and then how quickly are you able to correct them so that they don't happen again, whether that's you as an individual, as a head coach, or as assistants, as a staff, and even as players. Is that, everything's not going to be able to be perfect, but there's got to be a sense of accountability. There's got to be, a sense of demand to be able to execute, but then also a realization that, yes, there will be some times where it's not executed exactly the way that it should be. And how are we going to get that fixed, and how are we going to do it quickly?
Yeah. That's yeah, that's great advice. Ben, you coached 23 drafted players at Cornell. And I know in the recruiting process that, one of the narratives that might get out there, it's like, hey, if you want to be a pro, you don't go to an Ivy League school. And you definitely don't go to Princeton. Although, I mean, I know that you've got pictures on your alumni wall of lots of players that did it.
Yeah.
But just based on your experience at Quinnipiac, particularly at Cornell, if because there's going to be some parents and players that you're going to reach out to, they're going to go on the internet. This conversation is going to come up. What would you tell them about the opportunity to obviously, open some just life-changing doors academically? And I know for one, like, I want you to send me a Princeton hockey poster so I can put it in my 5-year-old's room and he can stare at it for the next 10 years and
Yeah.
and hopefully get an opportunity like that. But what would you tell those players or families about the opportunity to open some life-changing doors within their hockey career?
I would just say, why can't you do both? Like it's as simple as that. Like we talked about, driven people, is why does academics have to be separate from athletics? I mean, you know, athletics teaches you so many lessons in life. It helps you in so many different ways to be able to prepare for academic rigor. Is why can't you do both? And when you talk about the guys that I've been fortunate to be able to coach, is the biggest thing is they've been able to balance kind of the challenges academically, but also the challenges athletically, but still remain focused on what it is that they want to get accomplished. And sometimes it comes quicker for others. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to be able to get there. But they maintain that focus and an understanding that, hey, it's cool to be good in school, the same way as it's cool to be able to work at your craft, which is becoming a better hockey player in the hopes of becoming a professional. And that would be it's pretty simple, but why can't you do both?
Love it, man. Well, for anybody tuning into this, again, just an amazing opportunity. I know that as you get set up down there, it is. I think just the overall environment is so unique, just in terms of the setting, the campus, the facilities, etc. And obviously can have as I said, just an unbelievable influence on what happens to a player's life after hockey, and obviously in hockey as well. Ben, I can hear your phone going off the whole time we've been chatting. I know you got a million things going on. I can't thank you enough for taking an hour out of your day to spend time with us. And like I said, I think we're like the coaching community and so many people you've crossed paths with. We're rooting for you and can't wait to see what you get cooking down there and at Gritty U.
Yeah, I like the new brand right there. I like that. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.